to you, and welcome to our weekend worship service here at the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. What a glorious spring day it is. It's my favorite time of the year, and what a wonderful feeling I have being with you today here in spirit. I'm so glad you're here too. If you're joining us for the first time today, can I just tell you how glad I am that you're here? It's a wonderful time to join a religious community, and right now we need each other more than ever. So please visit our website, slcuu.org, or our social media channels to learn more about our congregation and what we're doing here in Salt Lake City. We'd love to get to know you better. Now, we've got some important announcements to make this morning as we get underway. First, next Sunday, May 16th, is a big day for our congregation. This will be the last Sunday that Reverend Goldsmith takes the pulpit as the senior minister of this congregation. We will have a live worship service on Zoom starting at 10 o'clock, where you'll get to hear his last sermon. Then take a quick break and come right back for our congregational meeting, where we'll honor our fifth UU principle of democratic engagement by voting on our annual budget, new board members, the proposed eighth principle, and we'll celebrate all the successes of this really unusual year. After the meeting, have some lunch, take a break, and then get ready for a drive-by car parade to wave goodbye to Tom and Mary here at our church on 13th East. If your last name begins with the letters A through L, we'd like to see you drive by starting at 4 p.m. with last names with letters M through Z coming by starting at 4:30. Now there's a map showing you how to drive through the neighborhood and get in line, and you can find the map and the instructions on our website or in your Torch email this week. Now, I know that was a big announcement, and you might be feeling a little overwhelmed, but this next one is just as big and important, so I want to make sure you don't miss it. As I mentioned, next Sunday, May 16th, will be a live worship service starting at 10 a.m. From then until the end of the year, most Sundays we will be having live worship on Zoom each Sunday starting at 10 o'clock. With coffee hour to follow on the same link. Now, your worship team will be together in the chapel and streaming live, and of course, the live stream will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel so you can watch later if you choose. So, set aside 10 o'clock on Sundays to make time to worship with your UU community. But you can still wear your pajamas if you want. I won't judge. Last announcement, not as big, but still important. Our small group ministry year is coming to a close, although some groups will continue to meet socially throughout the summer. Now, since we tried a new program this year, the Soul Matters curriculum, I want to get your feedback on how the year went. So if you participated in a small group this year, I invite you to take a quick survey to let me know what you thought about it and how you'd like to see the program improve going forward. So please check your Torch email this week for a link to the survey. Thanks in advance for your feedback. Now, we'll begin our service by lighting the chalice. First, I light 2 more candles, once more, for lives lost to police violence. The names Makia Bryant, Andrew Brown, that their names and the hundreds of names we'll never hear won't be forgotten. And then I light this chalice flame for hope, for the possibility of change, for our unwavering resolve, and for the Unitarian Universalist faith that strengthens us for the work of changing the world. Hear these words by the Reverend Darcy Roke. There is too much hardship in this world not to find joy every day. There's too much injustice in this world to not right the balance every day. There's too much pain in this world to not heal every day. Each of us ministers to a weary world. Let us do that which calls us to make this world more loving, more compassionate, and more filled with the grace of divine presence every day.
This Sunday in the United States is Mother's Day, a day set aside to honor the people who mother and care for us, which was not the intention at all by the holiday's founder, Julia Ward Howe. I'm sorry, I said her name all wrong. In order to say her name appropriately, you need to pretend that you are a feisty writer, abolitionist, suffragette, anti-war activist, believer in temperance, proper Bostonian lady, who was also a Unitarian. You've got to say it like this: Julia Ward Howe, with all that identity behind it. Born in 1819, Julia received the very best education. She learned French, Italian, and German, and was able to read Latin and Greek easily. Julia was, as described at the time, high-spirited. Her mother died early in her life, and she lost her father by the time she was 20. While alive, her father threw himself into caring for his children, and as a strict Calvinist, lifted up those values to his children. Being a reader, though, her liberal views didn't sit well with her father's Calvinist faith. She was given a copy of William Ellery Channing's sermons, met Ralph Waldo Emerson, and attended lectures with Margaret Fuller, and found out she was a Unitarian, actually, all this time. Around then, she met Samuel Howe. Samuel was an educator of children with severe disabilities. Right away, though, Julia saw that this marriage would be a trial. Samuel wanted a wife to adore him and support his work. Julia wanted her independence. Their marriage would never be a peaceable one. By 1848, Julia had 2 different anthologies published, much to her husband's dismay. She edited journals and contributed social and literary criticism. In 1854, she published a book of poetry under a pen name, but of course, everyone in her social circles knew it was her. It was a book filled with poetry, reflecting the experiences of women and domestic unhappiness. Her husband was livid, and the couple was on the brink of divorce. They stayed together, however, for the familiar reason of their children. Julia called it the greatest sacrifice that she would ever be called to make. She continued to write, however, poetry, plays, and essays. At this time, the nation was on the brink of the Civil War. Her friend, Reverend Theodore Parker, invited her to meet with an abolitionist group, and she began to work with the Sanitary Commission in support of Union forces. Traveling to the battle lines with her own minister, James Freeman Clarke, they encountered fierce fighting. Inspired by the day's events, Clarke encouraged her to write new lyrics to a song that the troops were currently singing. Staying up all night, not wanting to wake up her sleeping children, she wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was published in 1862. After the war, Julia became close with another rabble-rousing set of Unitarian, the suffragists. Along with Lucy Soane, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, they were leading the charge for women's suffrage. Quote, "The new domain now made clear to me was that of true womanhood. Woman no longer in her ancillary relation to her opposite, man, but in her direct relation to the divine plan and purpose, as a free agent, fully sharing with man every human right and every human responsibility." The work of women's suffrage would be her life's work for the rest of her days. Imbued with her new feminist thought, she was disgusted with the barbarism of the Franco-Prussian War sweeping through Europe. She led a one-woman campaign, starting with writing a Mother's Day proclamation for a women's peace conference in London. Back in Boston, she initiated Mother's Peace Day as a call to action for families. The The holiday has evolved far from her intentions, although I have yet to find a mother that wants her children in needless war and conflict in our world. Julia held the very first convention for women ministers, including Unitarians and Universalists, like Eliza Tupper Wilkes, the elder sister of our first female minister at First Church, Mila Tupper Maynard. By this time, Julia was preaching on her own, with her husband now resigned to her advocacy. Samuel died in 1876, with the couple finally finding peace with one another. In 1908, she was the first woman elected into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. In her final years, women would visit her, seeking her advice. She would tell them, "Study Greek, my dear. It's better than a diamond necklace." Julia Ward Howe died on October 17, 1910. This history of Julia Ward Howe was part of today's worship and is part of a larger Unitarian Universalist history project the Religious Education Department has been working on for about 3 years. To learn more about this project and the lives of other important Unitarian Universalists, you can visit uuoftheweek.org.
Our Unitarian Universalist Association will reach the ripe old age of 60 on May 12th, and what a ride it's been. Now, 60 is not old for a person, but it's really not old for a religious movement, although it can be easy to forget that Universalism and Unitarianism were each pretty old on their own when they merged. In fact, I think of this date really more as an anniversary than a birthday, and I think of the merger of these faiths like a marriage, the marriage of two old faiths who dated each other for 100 years or longer and finally decided they couldn't avoid their feelings for each other any longer. In fact, the famous 19th century minister, the Reverend Thomas Starr King, who served both Universalist and Unitarian congregations, said once that the only reason that the Unitarians and the Universalists haven't already joined was that they were too closely related to be married. Now, that's not to say that it was a perfect match by any means. No marriage ever really is. Any couple has worries and fears about how much they will be asked to sacrifice to make this relationship work. Nevertheless, on May 12th, 1961, the Unitarian Universalist Association was born, bringing together the best of two historic traditions with centuries of wisdom and worship. From our Unitarian ancestors, we gained the heretical spirit of Miguel Serveto and Ferenc David and Faustus Socino, known to us as Michael Servetus, Francis David, and Faustus Socinus. We gained the transcendentalist thinking of Emerson, Fuller, and Thoreau, the social justice tradition of Theodore Parker and the women's ministries of the Iowa Sisterhood, the atheist humanism of John Dietrich. From our Universalist side, we received the fervor for universal salvation of John Murray, Hosea Ballou, and George de Benneville, the connection with other worlds given to us by the spiritualist movement, and the one world appreciation of religions of other nations and cultures from Universalists of the 20th century. All these things went together into the pot that became the rich stew of Unitarian Universalism that we love today. So, what do the next 60 years hold for us? Well, here's what I'm hoping for. A movement that brings soulful power and presence into the communities that it serves. A commitment to deep relationship and healing in racial justice work. A rich spirituality that brings us together in covenant and takes us deep into meaning making. A rethinking of congregational polity that moves us to connect with other congregations in new and innovative ways, and holds congregations and ministers accountable to their own highest ethical values. And I'm looking forward to seeing how future generations of UUs interpret this incredible religious heritage given to us by the ages. May they go on to carry our heresies forward. May they be unafraid to condemn us for our orthodoxies. And may they, and may we, always be proud to be Unitarian Universalists. Amen.
Well, I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us at our worship service at the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. As a Unitarian minister for 46 years, I have spent a fair amount of time trying to define Unitarianism, sing its praises, critique its weakness, extract its history, and ponder its future. Yet never have I expressed my appreciation for what Unitarianism has meant in my life. Although I sometimes wished I lived among the Transcendentalists some 125 years ago, that would have been fun, I plowed through contemporary Unitarianism and all its successes and failings, its surprises and steadfastness, its theology and spirituality. For better or worse, the Unitarian ministry has served as my exclusive livelihood throughout my entire adult life. My first congregation called me to their parish on the Massachusetts coast 6 days before I reached the age of 26. So I've been at this for quite a while. It's time now, I believe, to share my appreciation. As many of you know, I was born into the Unitarian Church, which certainly has its downside. I was reminded of that on each and every UU orientation class I ever facilitated. When the newcomers took a few minutes to share their own spiritual journey from the religion of their family origin to the promised land of Unitarianism, I envied their pilgrimage. Their journeys mostly included stories of liberation from orthodoxy and rigid concepts of religion, often antithetical to science and reason. They all had this aha moment when the light bulb went on, and they knew it was time to change direction in their spiritual lives. They sought a different environment and context in which to grow religiously. Well, frankly, I was jealous of their journey from dogma to religious freedom. I felt I missed out since I began my journey at the finish line. It was like, all I could say was, I've always been a Unitarian, now what? But upon deeper reflection, it becomes obvious that there is no finish line in a spiritual journey, even as a Unitarian. Unitarianism may take the choke collar off from around our necks, sending us forth with newfound freedom, but we make a mistake in thinking that's all there is. We are a liberal religion, and that in and of itself carries a huge responsibility. We find, even in the word liberalism, the Latin root liber, which means free. We could also say liberalism, but it's there. Liber, liberal, it's all in one piece. It's the same root word like liberty, as in living in a state of freedom, and liberation, which entails the act of setting people free, even oneself. Historically, Unitarian Universalisms dared to liberate people from the fear, judgment, and obedience inherent in traditional religion. Unitarianism liberated people from the orthodoxy of Calvinism by contesting the doctrines of original sin and eternal punishment. I appreciate our courageous forebears for having the audacity to correct most of society's assumptions about God, who ostensibly had already preordained those to be saved and those to be damned. It was like going around saying, sorry, sir, but your ideas about God, Jesus, eternal life, they are so wrong. What are you holding on to? They're wrong, okay? Just do away with them. I don't think we were ever enormously popular, and probably for good reason. I love the story of the Reverend Thomas Barnard of Salem, Massachusetts, and this story goes back to right around the time of the American Revolutionary War. A parishioner confronted him after the service and said, "Reverend Barnard, we've never heard you preach a sermon upon the Trinity." To which he replied, "And you never will." I have a renewed appreciation for William Ellery Channing, who established the American Unitarian Association in 1825. He took liberation quite literally, a liberation from the false premise of religion to obey authorities in order to receive the rewards of God's grace and love, a liberation from the constraints of doctrines that limited the role of reason and conscience needed for one's own spiritual journey, and quite simply, a liberation from religious mythology. It was during the religious frenzy of the Second Great Awakening that Channing proclaimed a remarkably liberating position. He contended that religion was not about conversion. Religion is about growth, individual growth. And he made it deliciously clear. He said religion is not something you get, like being saved, and then you go on with the rest of your life. Instead, the goal of religion is to deepen and enrich the spiritual life through what he referred to as self-culture. So rather than focus on conversion, which remains limited to a single decisive event, self-culture means cultivating one's inner spiritual nature or one's inner soul. This distinction proved groundbreaking when, imagine, about 200 years ago, Channing rewrote the rules for a spiritual life. The spiritual life was not obtained by adopting a creed, but by grasping that spirituality is an ongoing process. Well, for me, this points to a kind of restlessness of the spirit, staying in one place as though spirituality were static will only limit the awareness of life's many blessings. Ralph Waldo Emerson contended, there goes another transcendentalist. Anyway, Emerson contended that the greatest challenge in life was to wake up before we die. We're always getting ready to live, he said, but there is very little life in a lifetime. Very little life in a lifetime. Another iteration of that theme is found in Ferlinghetti's beat poetry. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of things, as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes, but then in the middle of it comes the smiling mortician. With increased awareness of our mortality, we ought to be mindful of developing our spiritual lives. In our journey, we inevitably stumble upon contemporary challenges and anxieties. Unitarianism, however, courageously explores issues of meaning, values, ethics, justice, and the deepening social crises of our time. I really do, I appreciate the framework implicit in Unitarian Universalism for interpreting the trials we confront, pertaining, for example, to matters of race, environmental degradation, and social inequities. And always, liberation remains the catalyst of our pursuits. Unitarian Universalism at its core resists the easy path towards apathy, sometimes quite tempting even for the well-meaning. Instead, Unitarian Universalism awakens an inner strength to respond respond to living the values that you and I both know are seminal in the development of our true humanity. Now, here's where I believe the role of liberation, the requisite component of liberal religion, the role of liberation always serves as the North Star in keeping our faith relevant in a world that's unraveling in ethical neglect. Unitarian Universalism teaches us, not through doctrines, but through a cultivation of values and meaning. It teaches us that the pillars of Western thought are out of place. I say that one more time. The pillars of Western thought are out of place. And they include freedom, autonomy, and sovereignty. We are caught in the vortex of those who aim to conserve, the intent of conservatives, conserve misdirected values. They call for the freedom to accumulate huge fortunes with cold disregard for any imbalance created in society. They demand autonomy to pursue life independently of any ethical responsibilities. They value sovereignty, perpetuating the illusion that we, the human race, has dominion over nature, other nations, and all the peoples of the world. Now, rather than conserve these destructive views in a rapidly changing world, Unitarian Universalism moves to liberate those who insist erroneously that the common good only interferes with their own personal rights as free citizens. Liberate them from their obsessive preoccupation with the self that denies others, literally denies others the chance to even live. The work of Unitarian Universalism involves critiquing the dominant narratives that feed the hubris of humankind. Unitarianism helps us define, actually to get crystal clear in our understanding of freedom and autonomy in the context of a web of relationships requiring mutual dependency. Unitarian Universalism inspires action to help shape a better world through liberating the self from its own self-absorption. An inflated ego simply does not belong in a global economy, an earth devastated by neglect, and a wealth gap that exacerbates race tensions already rife from gross violations from the past. Our liberal view of coexistence, mutuality, finely tuned through the centuries, must be inserted into a world now, a world crying out for interdependency. It's our only way to survive these dark times in which we find ourselves. We can no longer afford to believe that we are separate from nature, separate from our fellow human beings. Attempting to conserve old ideas about human entitlement fails to preserve a world for our children. Our children today, the children of tomorrow. There's absolutely a blind spot in terms of any kind of commitment to the future. Unitarian Universalism could easily adopt that great pronouncement by General Marcos, who led the Zapatista Liberation Army in Chiapas, Mexico, to defend the rights of the indigenous people. He said, and you're going to love this, he said, "Apologies for the inconvenience, but this is a revolution." Love that. We apologize for the inconvenience, but this is a revolution. Well, you know, it might be easy for some of us to consider Unitarian Universalism as a liberating army engaged in revolution. We may not be as polite as General Marcos, but the forces fighting to conserve the freedom to pollute the air and water, conserve the right to extract resources from the earth at will, to conserve American exceptionalism, personal exceptionalism, worshiping at the altar of greed. This calls for a revolution to liberate us from devastating practices that imperil us all. Now, essentially, it all comes back to self-culture and spiritual development. Unitarian Universalism exhorts us to continually re-examine who we are and what our place is in the world. The revolution calls the question, must not the ideology of dominance be subjected to a radical overhaul? Otherwise, we implode in the sniveling muck of individualism. Now, what I love about Unitarian Universalism, and which makes me so appreciative, are the tools at our disposal. What do I mean by tools? Let me give an example. What we research, what we try to understand and make accessible to all of us to help us gain a sense of radical alternatives to the persisting narrative in this country. We have tools such as literature, theology, art, social sciences, political science, music, history. I mean, these are all the threads that weave purpose and discernment and values into whole cloth. It's what makes ministry so breathlessly exciting. You know, it's like, look at the tool chest that we ministers can set in motion in the work of liberation. These tools help us imagine a deep sense of commonality. In addressing the issues of our day, it's crucial that we call for a new way of thinking and feeling about our role in the world. Our liberal religious task as progressives is to transform the concept of progress, moving concepts of personal growth from self-adulation to loving our neighbor. That's a progressive ideology. That's a huge, huge change. Now, we have done an extraordinary job in our country in learning what? We've learned not to see. We have learned not to see the injustices inflicted on people of color and upon the natural world. Rather than conserve the habit of not seeing, our mission as Unitarian Universalists is to liberate all of us from such blindness. Now, I want to draw once more from the same Ferlinghetti poem, a different verse. The world is a beautiful place to be born into if you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Only by seeing and engaging and liberating can we start working on new possibilities for saving the world, for saving our own souls. Unitarian Universalism has provided for me the framework in which I have ministered for close to half a century. But the beauty is that this is not just the work of a minister. This is all our work, and we need to do it together. You know, the mission of this church did not materialize out of thin air. It's based on our discernment of what Unitarian Universalism means to us today and how to apply its lessons in a turbulent world. I hope you join me in appreciation of Unitarian Universalism, its history, its principles, its perspectives on the infinite possibilities of love. So be it.